Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hi everybody and welcome back to Safiyya Traders Bookstore's weekly book review, and this is Samil. This week we have with us in our review an extremely significant work written by one of the most outspoken and commendable intellectuals of our time, Arundhati Roy. The name of the author is Arundhati Roy. The name of the book, the title of the book is The Doctor and the Saint. The Doctor and the Saint, the Ambedkar-Gandhi Debate, Caste, Race and Annihilation of Caste. So this is the topic of the book. So before we move on, I would like to remind our viewers to subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't hesitate to click the bell icon for recent updates. The Doctor and the Saint. The Doctor and the Saint was originally written as an introduction for an annotated edition of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's most radical and iconic text, Annihilation of Caste. Annihilation of Caste is not an argument directed at Hindu extremists or fundamentalists, but at those who considered themselves moderate Hindus, those whom Ambedkar called the best of Hindus. Even some academics call them the left-wing Hindus, so to speak. Ambedkar's point is that to believe in Shastras, the practice of caste, India's own form of social apartheid. So to believe in Shastras and to simultaneously think of oneself as liberal and moderate is a contradiction in terms. When the text of Annihilation of Caste was first published, the man who is often called the greatest of Hindus, Mahatma Gandhi, responded to Ambedkar's provocation. Their debate was not a new one. Both these men, both Ambedkar and Gandhi, both these men were their generation's emissaries of a profound social, political and philosophical conflict that had begun long ago and has still by no means ended. Ambedkar, the untouchable, was heir to the anti-caste intellectual tradition that goes back to 200 BC. While Gandhi, on the other hand, a Vaishya. There are four ranks, there are four layers in this caste hierarchy: the Brahmins, the Vaishyas, the Kshatriyas and the Sudras. So Gandhi, a Vaishya born into a Gujarati Banya family, was the latest in a long tradition of privileged caste Hindu reformers and their organizations. Putting the Ambedkar-Gandhi debate into context for those unfamiliar with its history and its protagonists will require detours into its very different political trajectories. For this was by no means a mere theoretical debate between two men who held different opinions. Each represented separate interest groups, and their battle unfolded in the heart of India's national movement. What they said and did continues to have an immense bearing on contemporary politics, and their differences were and still remain irreconcilable. Both are deeply loved and often deified by their followers. Ambedkar was Gandhi's most formidable adversary. He challenged Gandhi not only politically and intellectually but also morally. So to have excised Ambedkar from Gandhi's story, the story which we all grew up on, so to have excised Ambedkar from Gandhi's story is of course a travesty. Equally so, to ignore Gandhi when we speak about or write about Ambedkar is to do Ambedkar a disservice, because Gandhi loomed over Ambedkar's world in a myriad and often unwonderful ways. Dr. Ambedkar, who incidentally did not even have a walk-on role in Richard Attenborough's the Gandhi film, even though the film was co-funded by the Indian government, he is chosen more often for the part he played in drafting the Indian Constitution than for the politics and the passion that were at the core of his thinking and life. So therefore you definitely get the sense that his presence on the lists of the founding fathers of an independent India, his presence on that list is the result of a positive discrimination, a desire to be politically correct. The fact is that neither Ambedkar nor Gandhi allows us to pin easy labels on them that say pro-imperialist or anti-imperialist. Their conflict complicates or perhaps enriches our understanding of imperialism and the struggle against it. History has been kind to Mahatma Gandhi. He was actually deified by millions of people in his own lifetime. So Mahatma Gandhi's godliness therefore has become a universal and so it seems an eternal phenomenon. It is not just that this metaphor has outstripped the man, outstripped Mahatma Gandhi. Rather it has entirely reinvented him. Mahatma Gandhi has become all things to all people. Barack Obama loves him and so does the Occupy movement. Likewise, the anarchists love him and so does the establishment. Narendra Modi loves him and so does Rahul Gandhi. The poor love him and so do the rich. And so he is the saint of the status quo. Gandhi's life and his writings, some 48,000 pages bound into 98 volumes of collected works, have been disaggregated and carried off event by event, sentence by sentence, until no coherent narrative remains, if indeed there ever was one. The trouble is that Mahatma Gandhi actually said everything and its opposite. To cherry pickers, he offers such a bewildering variety of cherries that you have to wonder whether there is something the matter with the tree. For example, there is his well-known description of an Arcadian paradise in the pyramid versus the oceanic circle. Written in the year 1946. He has written in the year 1946, and I read, independence begins at the bottom. Thus, every village will be a republic or panchayat having full powers. It follows, therefore, that every village has to be self-sustained and capable of managing its affairs, even to the extent of defending itself against the whole world. In this structure, composed of innumerable villages, there will be ever-widening, never-ascending circles. Life will not be a pyramid with its apex sustained at the bottom, but it will be an oceanic circle whose center will be the individual, always ready to perish for the village. Therefore, the outermost circumference will not wield power to crush the inner circle, but will give strength to all within and derive its own strength from it. So these are his words. These are the words of Mahatma Gandhi. Then there is his endorsement of the caste system in the year 1921 in Navajivan. It has been translated from Gujarati by Dr. Ambedkar. I read, these are Gandhi's words. Caste is another name of control. Caste puts a limit on enjoyment. Caste does not allow a person to transgress caste limits in pursuit of his enjoyment. This is the meaning of such caste restrictions as inner dining and intermarriage. These being my views, I am opposed to all those who are out to destroy the caste system. So these are again the words of Mahatma Gandhi. Is this not the very antithesis of ever-widening, never-ascending circles? This is why Dr. Ambedkar suggested more than once that Gandhi deceived people. He was always double-dealing, and that his writings in Gujarati as well as in English must be productively compared. So at this juncture, I would like to read the passages of Ambedkar in this regard. Ambedkar says, it's true that these statements of Gandhi were made 25 years apart. Does that mean that Gandhi reformed, that he changed his views on caste? He did at a glacial pace. From believing in the caste system in all its minutiae, he moved to saying that the 4,000 separate castes should fuse themselves into the four varnas. The four varnas, what Ambedkar called the parent of the caste system. So towards the end of Gandhi's life, when his views were just views and did not run the risk of translating into political action, he said that he no longer objected to interdining and intermarriage between castes. Sometimes he also used to say that even though he believed in the Varna system, a person's Varna ought to be decided by his worth and not by his birth. This is the position of Arya Samaj too. Ambedkar pointed out the absurdity of this idea. He asked, and I read, "How are you going to compel people who have achieved a higher status based on their birth with reference to their worth to vacate the status?" He also asked, "How are you going to compel people to recognize the status due to a man in accordance to his worth who is occupying a lower status on his birth?" I repeat, how are you going to compel people to recognize the status due to a man in accordance to his worth who is occupying a lower status based on his birth? Ambedkar went on to ask, what would happen to women, whether their status would be decided upon their worth, their own worth, or their husband's worth? So these are the words of Ambedkar. Gandhi never decisively and categorically renounced his belief on Chaturvarna, the system of four Varnas. Many would ask, why not eschew the negative and concentrate instead on what was good about Gandhi? It is a very valid question, a question that those who have built shrines to Gandhi have probably answered for themselves. After all, it is possible to admire the works of a musician or a composer or a writer or an architect or a sports person whose views are inimical to our own. But Gandhi is not a writer or a poet or a musician or a sports person. He offered to us as a visionary, as a moralist, as a mystic, as a reformer, as a great humanitarian who brought down a great empire armed only with truth and righteousness. So how do we reconcile the idea of the non-violent Gandhi, the Gandhi who spoke truth to power, the Gandhi, the nemesis of injustice, the gentle Gandhi, Gandhi the mother, Gandhi who allegedly feminized politics and created space for women to enter the political arena, the eco-friendly Gandhi, the Gandhi of the ready wit. So how do we reconcile all this with Gandhi's views and deeds on caste? So what do we do with the structure of moral righteousness that rests so comfortably on a foundation of utterly brutal institutionalized injustice? Is it enough to say that Gandhi was so complicated and let it go like that? There is no doubt that Gandhi was indeed an extraordinary and fascinating man, but during India's struggle for freedom, did he really speak truth to power? Did he really ally himself with the poorest of the poor, the most vulnerable of his people? In this regard, Dr. Ambedkar says, and I read, "It is foolish to take solace in the fact that because the Congress is fighting for the freedom of India, it is therefore fighting for the freedom of the people of India and of the lowest of the low." I repeat, it is foolish to take solace in the fact that because the Congress is fighting for the freedom of India, it is therefore fighting for the freedom of the people of India and of the lowest of the low. He also goes on to say that the question whether the Congress is fighting for freedom has very little importance as compared to the question for whose freedom is the Congress fighting. The question whether the Congress is fighting for freedom has very little importance as compared to the question for whose freedom is the Congress fighting. These are the words of Ambedkar. In 1931, when Ambedkar met Gandhi for the first time, Gandhi questioned him about his sharp criticism of the Congress, which it was assumed was tantamount to criticizing the struggle for the homeland. Ambedkar's famous reply was, "Gandhiji, I have no homeland." This was Ambedkar's famous reply. He went on to say that no untouchable worth the name will be proud of this land. So history has been unfair and unkind to Ambedkar. At first it contained him and then it glorified him. It made him India's leader of the untouchables, the king of the ghetto. It has hidden away his writing. It has stripped away the radical intellect and the searing insolence. All the same, Ambedkar's followers have kept his legacy alive in creative ways. One of those ways is to turn him into a million mass-produced statues. The Ambedkar statue is a radical and animate object. It has been sent forth into the world to claim the space, both physical and virtual, private and public, that is the Dalits due. The Dalits have used Ambedkar's statue to assert their civil rights. To claim a land that owed them, to claim water that is theirs, and commons they have denied access to. Ambedkar's circumstances forced him to be a revolutionary and to simultaneously put his foot on the door of the establishment whenever he got a chance to. His genius lay in his ability to use both these aspects of himself nimbly and to great effect. Viewed through the prism of the present, however, it has meant that he has left behind a dual and sometimes confusing legacy. Ambedkar the radical, and Ambedkar the father of the Indian Constitution. Constitutionalism can come in the way of revolution because the Dalit revolution has not happened yet, and we await it. So in these circumstances, it seems absolutely relevant that we bring out a review of this book, The Doctor and the Saint. The Doctor and the Saint will certainly overwhelm the readers with astonishment by the myths and fiction being not only spread but so cemented that it has become hardly impossible to investigate even the authenticity of it. The review of this book is significant when we try to explore answers for certain questions. Has the oppression and tyranny and injustice, the bloodshed, violence committed in the name of caste been reduced all these years? Has the pain coming out of this oppression and tyranny and violence been mitigated all these years? The answer is absolutely not. Conversely, they have been exponentially rising day in and day out. So in this context and circumstances, it is absolutely necessary that we bring out a review of this book. And I think it is also relevant to quote some of the passages briefly from this book. The author, Arundhati Roy, in the very first page of her book writes, "If you have heard of Malala Yousafzai but not of Surekha Botmange, do read Ambedkar. If you have heard of Malala Yousafzai and not of Surekha Botmange, do read Ambedkar." So who is this Surekha Botmange? Let me divulge the answer. Surekha Botmange was 40 years old and had committed several crimes too, she writes. She was a woman, an untouchable, a Dalit woman who lived in India, and she wasn't dirt poor. She was more educated than her husband, so she functioned as the head of her family. Dr. Ambedkar was her hero. Like him, her family had renounced Hinduism and converted to Buddhism. So let me quickly finish this. So what happened to the Surekha Botmange, a Dalit woman? To make a long story short, about 70 incensed villagers, men and women, arrived in tractors and surrounded the Botmange's house. Her husband, Bayalal, who was out in the fields, heard the noise and ran home. He hid behind a bush and watched the mob attack his family. He ran to Dusala, the nearest town, and through a relative managed to call the police. You need context to get the police to even pick up the phone. They never came. The mob dragged Surekha Botmange, Priyanka, her daughter, and the two boys, one of them partially blind, out of the house. The boys were ordered to rape their mother and sister, and when they refused, their genitals were mutilated and eventually they were lynched. Surekha and Priyanka were gang raped and beaten to death. The 4 bodies were dumped into a nearby canal where they were found the next day. So, if you have heard of Malala Yousafzai but not of Surekha Botmange, do read Ambedkar. So, The Doctor and the Saint, hats off to its author Arundhati Roy for displaying such an erudition, courage and candidness to tell the world the truth we all deserve and to unveil the mirror of our own hypocrisy. The Doctor and the Saint, the Ambedkar-Gandhi debate, caste, race and annihilation of caste, written by Arundhati Roy. The price of the book is $299. The number of pages is 165. For orders, contact Safiyya Traders Bookstore, Nagarkoil. And this is Samil. See you next week.